Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to this episode of Let's Talk. Today we're discussing being ambassadors for Islam, being good examples, and so forth. And we have a very special guest with us in our studio. Brother Idris, would you like to introduce our guest?
I'd be delighted to. Yusuf, I'm delighted to welcome you. We welcome with us today, we're honoured to have with us today, Yusuf Rashid. Yusuf is the second secretary in the Political and Public Affairs section at the Canadian Embassy here in Cairo. And you do honour us by coming to join us today.
Thank you, Idris.
Assalamu
My pleasure.
alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam. Shukran.
And the reason we invited Yusuf Rashid to come with us today is because we've been talking about being ambassadors for Islam. And we're going to talk about the work of an ambassador or the work in an embassy. And while we're talking, I'd like you to compare what's being said about representing your country abroad to what we've been talking about earlier on about representing Islam to others. And I think you'll find there are very interesting parallels to what's being said. My first question to you, Yusuf, it's a bit of a sneaky question, but are you the token Muslim in the Canadian Embassy in Cairo?
Well, that's a good question. Thinking about it, I mean, we only have 19 Canadians in the embassy. And yeah, I believe I am the only Muslim among the Canadians. But that being said, we also have a number of Egyptians who work in the embassy, about 60, I believe. And of course, the Egyptians, there's a mix of Christians and Muslims. So in total, there's a number of Muslims working in the embassy. We have a mix of all religions represented, and it's interesting, and it reinforces the diversity which Canada stands for. And I think it makes for a good workplace.
Are you unusual in that you're because you work in the Canadian Diplomatic Service? Are there many Muslims working in the? Do you know? Did you know that?
Yeah, I know quite a number of Muslims working in the diplomatic service, in the foreign service. In fact, I was hired with a number of them. I think what our foreign service tries to do in its hiring practices is reflect the diversity of Canada as a country. Canada has nearly 1 million Muslims among its population, and so of course in hiring foreign service officers which will represent Canada abroad, the department tries to reflect the diversity within Canada. So we have foreign service officers of all ethnicities, all religions, all backgrounds, and I think it makes for a very good workplace and an excellent way to represent Canada abroad.
And you're from Vancouver.
I'm from Vancouver,
which
the west
is
coast
on the
Canada.
West Coast.
The far coast, yes.
I asked you earlier on, is it like the Wild West? But it's not quite the Wild West.
Perhaps it used to be, but no, it's a very nice town, and it's where I spent my childhood, where I grew up with both my parents, and I think it's basically the polar opposite of Egypt, which makes for an enjoyable experience here. All of the things that I missed being in Vancouver, I get in boatloads here, whereas there's of course some things I miss about my hometown, but it's
like what? Like what?
Well, the mountains and the ocean for one. Of course, living in the middle of Cairo and Zamalek, getting out and taking advantage of nature isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. I grew up skiing since the age of 3, so I don't get to do too much of that in the Middle East. But it's there's a whole range of new opportunities here, things to do.
Are there many Muslims in Vancouver?
There are quite a few Muslims in Vancouver. My father, being from Pakistan, is part of a large Pakistani community in Vancouver.
I see.
A lot of East Asians, also a lot of Persians in Vancouver, and of course, as through all the major cities in Canada, there's a lot of people from the Arab world. One of my best friends growing up was from Lebanon, and I know Vancouver has tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Muslims. And so Vancouver, like most of the cities in Canada, is very diverse.
We're just kind of weaving in and out of things, but one thing that comes to mind straight away is, when you think about Canada, it seems to me, and in fact I've said this in a talk in the embassy in Cairo, Canada's standing is quite good in the Muslim world, or it has been, because it's not been associated with what we might call the excesses of your neighbour. You've kind of followed your own path, and Canada played an important role in the Suez crisis here in Egypt, and encouraged peacekeeping. And so, what do you think Canada has to offer to the Muslim world, coming from the West? You're quite an emerging voice in the world. What can Canada contribute that maybe the United States can't? The United States is looking for dialogue. You know, we've not seen much evidence of it, but it's looking for dialogue. What can Canada offer maybe?
That's a good question, and speaking from a strictly personal point of view on that, I think that Canada could offer, looking at Canada's multicultural model, in which a number of Muslims, a lot of Egyptian Muslims are very, very successful in Canada, have become, full Canadian citizens and are very successful in their lives in Canada. I think it's a demonstration of how, Islam and the West aren't necessarily two opposing poles. People from the West, Canadians, can come and have quite a positive effect in the Islamic world, as you said, with the Suez Crisis, and conversely, people from the Arab world, Muslims, can come to Canada and lead very rewarding, successful lives. And I think Canada, as you say, is viewed as an impartial and just actor in this region. I mean, we don't have the profile that the United States does, and sometimes that can be a positive thing. I know our legacy of peacekeeping that you mentioned has given us quite a bit of credibility here to do some positive things. On a number of issues within the region, we try to play a positive role. And obviously, this region is an ongoing challenge in terms of the issues that we face. But Canada wants to play a constructive role in overcoming those. And I think just looking at our domestic experience of bringing people together, having success with diversity, lends us more credibility in the actions we take abroad, in the Arab world and the Muslim world in particular.
I mean, this is not a political show, so we're not here to talk about politics. But it does occur to me that everything isn't perfect. Canada isn't perfect like anywhere. And you do have, these questions of the business about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police chief resigning over problems a year or so ago, and people in Guantanamo Bay, and you've also, at the moment it seems to me, I've visited Canada, as you know, a few times and spoken there, and I'm going again this year. And up until now, there hasn't been that Islamophobia in Canada that's existed maybe in Western Europe. But there does seem to be emerging little pockets of problem in the press now over sisters wearing hijab for sports and stuff. How do you think you're going to manage to diffuse that without it turning into the problem it's been in the rest of the world?